What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Cards and Coffee. On today's deck talk, we're going to be talking about a deck that I personally think was going to be one of the best picks for YCS Pasadena. Well, until it got canceled. Not only was this going to be one of the most epic returns to live gameplay, but Pasadena's right in my backyard, basically. I'm always super disappointed whenever a major event in my area is missed, but luckily Konami has already announced that they're going to be hosting a Remote Duel YCS in place of Pasadena, so don't worry, this deck could easily be used for that tournament as well. Sky Striker is one of the most toolbox decks in the meta right now, being able to really do anything at any time as long as your engine's going. Not only that, but it also has access to DPE, one of the strongest cards in the meta today, and arguably this deck abuses DPE the best. Not only does this deck control the tempo of the game with all its toolbox spells, but you get to play a plethora of hand traps that can counter whatever the meta is at the time. Right now, the meta is just flooded with Sword Soul, and this deck actually has a really great matchup against it. Now, sure, there is a lot of other decks in the meta right now, but Sword Soul makes up most of it, let's be honest. Yes, there are other decks, Bird Up being probably your worst matchup, PK, Drytron, Fluanderies, you name it. There's just so many decks in the format right now, and I'm pretty sure that's why people love this format so much. It's really unfortunate that Pasadena was canceled. I know for myself, I personally put in quite a bit of time to make sure I'm prepared for this event, not only because I was hoping to add more tops to the resume, but of course this format, like I just mentioned, it's really great. Typically, I'm not the biggest fan of really diverse formats just because there's so much variance when it comes to what you could run into. So if your deck is very one lane or middle of the road, it's very hard to adapt with all the various matchups you could run into. And that, my friend, is why Ray is Bay. This deck is so versatile and can adapt to so many different matchups. We'll go through the card by card. I'll show you exactly what I'd play if I were going to a locals this weekend, or maybe even bringing this to the Remote Duel YCS. But first, as always, guys, please go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. Thanks, guys. All right, so starting things off, of course, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Sky Striker Ace, Ray. This is the heart and soul of your deck, giving you instant access to all your Link monsters and being able to recur itself from the grave whenever your links are removed from the field by your opponent. Makes for one of the most resilient cards in the game today. But not only that, it has the quick effect to tribute itself to special summon any of your Sky Striker links to the field. So I think there's really no reason to explain why Ray is Bay. The fact that this deck revolves around Link 1s, that once you get one monster on the field, you can constantly switch between all the Sky Strikers once per turn, use all their effects whenever you need them, and of course end with a Searcher in the follow-up, makes for just such an amazing deck right now. Now, this deck doesn't really OTK, and I'm pretty sure anybody who's played this deck knows this, but more times than not, you are going to be in the grind game, trading resources, and once this deck gets ahead, it's very hard for your opponent to catch back up. This deck does not generate an absurd amount of free advantage out of nowhere, and even though one card gets all your links going, you're definitely not spamming the field and OTKing, or just swarming the board with all kinds of resources, so being able to calculate and manage the resources in the game against your opponent is so important. This deck can take a lot of foresight. Now, one issue this deck does have is that if you don't see Ray, usually you don't play, and while that's not always true, it's definitely an uphill battle without her, and for that reason I am playing 2 copies of Sky Striker Ace, Rose. I definitely think you can get away with running 1, but more times than not, my worst hands are when I don't have a striker monster to start my turn. And yes, we do have spells that can search these cards, so really, you could get away with running the 4. But for me, 5 has tested really well, and technically Rose is an extender, so if ever you need a Link climb, she special summons herself whenever you special a Sky Striker Ace monster. This can set up Zeke plays, or even set up Verte for your DPE, and while Rose isn't as good as Ray, she definitely has a lot of things she brings to the table, especially her Grave effect, where Rose can recur herself whenever one of your opponent's extra deck monsters in the extra monster zone is removed by a card effect or even by battle, and when you do, you can target another face-up monster on the field and negate its effects. When we get through all the spells, there are obviously a lot of ways that you can just pick cards off your opponent's field. so triggering that graveyard effect is actually really easy. I don't think Rose gets the respect she deserves. This card is really amazing, and for me, 2 is just the perfect number. Now, I've mentioned it a couple times now, we are on DPE, so for me, I am playing the 1 Dasher and the 1 Celestial. I've seen a lot of people try to mix things up and kind of change the Destiny heroes they play in the deck, but personally, I think Dasher is the best Destiny hero to play in this deck, just because sometimes your hands can get a little clunky, so being able to special summon a monster you draw from your hand just makes it that much easier to resolve Celestial, and even set up some Link Climb plays without normal summoning. That's it really for the engine cards. It's a very small lineup, obviously. But after that, we are on a decent amount of hand traps in the deck. I am on first 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Obviously, this is just one of the most generic hand traps in the game right now. And while it's not the highest impact, it's definitely one you want to hold. And more times than not, Ash Blossom can answer a lot of problematic cards, whether it's Desires, Fusion Destiny, Ashina, Ecclesia. The Bird Hub deck has a bunch of searching. There's just so many things this card stops. So I definitely think this is a staple 3 of, even though you could argue it's fairly low impact. After Ash Blossom, I am personally on 2 copies of Nibiru. This is one of my favorite hand traps of the format right now, but the one awkward thing about it is it can kind of clunk your hand. Unlike a lot of the other hand traps in the game right now, you can't normal summon this very easily, so if your opponent's not summoning 5 times, it can be very hard to get this out of your hand. So resolving something like Celestial Engrave can be quite difficult sometimes. By running 2, you definitely minimize the odds of drawing multiples, because when you have the 1, if it is clogging your hand, there are ways to get it out. But if you have 2, yeah, that could be a little rough to get out of your hand. Now, it probably sounds weird that I'm saying it's clogging in my hand, but more times than not, it doesn't, because this card is so amazing in the meta right now. More times than not, you can set all your back row, let your opponent try to play through and get through all the disruptions, and in the end, you could just drop the Nibiru and wash away everything that they thought they could push through, and now you get to start the turn knowing that they're going to have nothing in your way, except for a token, but we can easily get over that. Now, this card does have another confliction where it sits in the main monster zone, and your Sky Striker spells obviously require you to have no monsters in your main monster zone to activate them, but that's typically not a problem because we can either link it off with any of your other monsters, pop it with DPE, or use a lot of your in-engine cards like Area Zero or Multi-Roll to just get rid of it. I personally suggest if you have this card in your hand, at the end of your turn when you search, it's probably best to search something like Multi-Roll or Area Zero. That way you know if you have to resolve Nibiru on your opponent's turn, you'll have a way to get it off the field. Nibiru is definitely one of the highest impact hand traps in the game right now, and backing it up alongside other hand traps like Effect Veiler can make for a very devastating play. If you have Nibiru and something like Effect Veiler, you could just let your opponent combo off and even let them put up their Omni Negate, because then once they make their finishing board, even if they have something like Baron de Fleur on the field, you can simply Nibiru, and then when they go to negate, then you just chain the Veiler, and they lose everything. I personally really like Veiler, and I think it's a staple in this deck if you're playing the Access Code package. And as much as I would have loved to have run 3, this is the card I cut to 2 to make room for the second Rose. The deck can kind of get tight on space depending on what kind of tech cards you're trying to play, so really, at the end of the day, it's up to you guys, whatever you're more comfortable with. For the last hand trap in my deck, I am on 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. This is just one of the best hand traps in the meta right now. Obviously, being able to just stop something like a Mo-Yi, any of the Tri-Brigade monsters, or do something similar like I mentioned before with Veiler and Nib. Impermanence just makes for an amazing card, and even drawing it for a 6 card for turn, using it as like a Chalice, makes for an insanely versatile card. Oh, and you could set it in the same column as IO, so really it's an in-deck out to Imperial Order. Moving on to the spells, which pretty much make up the bulk of the deck, obviously. The first thing we're playing, of course, is 1 copy of Reinforcements of the Army. Rey is a warrior, and Rey is Bae, so we're definitely trying to play all the cards that help us get to her. Speaking of cards that help you get to Rey, we are also playing 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity, and while it can be kind of troublesome to banish some of your extra deck cards, especially when this deck already wants to grind, I think this card is a must-have in the deck, just because, well, again, if you don't see Rey, it's gonna be really hard to play the game. Personally, if first turn I open this and I don't have access to Ray in any way, then I banish 6 for cost just to make sure I have the best odds at hitting Ray. And if I have Ray already, then typically I'll only banish 3, and who knows, maybe he'll get lucky and hit a Fusion Destiny or something. After the Prosperity, we are, of course, like I just mentioned, on 3 copies of Fusion Destiny. This card is so insane in this deck, not only because of Verte, but just drawing it and using it after you're done with all your Sky Striker plays. It's insane. Plus, it puts a spell in the grave and follow-up draw power. I don't know what else to say about this engine. I've mentioned it before in other deck profiles. This stuff is just so crazy right now. You have to play it. Obviously, right now, DPE is just an amazing card in the format, but it has so much synergy with this deck that, oddly, you would have never thought would come up. Combining it with something like Area 0 to special summon Ray from the deck, or even just getting bodies off the field, that way you can activate your Sky Striker spells, really just completes a lot of gaps this deck had, keeping it out of top tier contention. So while you could probably play this deck without it, you're probably not playing at its true potential. For the Sky Striker spells, of course, we are on 3 copies of Widow Anchor. This is your N-Engine Chalice. And of course, if you have 3 spells in the grave, it's also a Snatch Steal for the turn. This card sets up so many OTKs and so many Link summons, and it fits into the theme of this deck so beautifully of how versatile all the cards in this deck really is. Not only does it make for an amazing interruption, but you can even help use it to break boards, or even just get some of your cards to resolve if your opponent's trying to negate it with a monster effect. And since this card is very easy to access, this actually was one of the main reasons I decided to put Valor to 2 instead of like Ash or something. As you saw, we also had Impermanence, so being able to search these cards at any time just makes it to where effect negation could be a little overkill. After that, we are of course on 2 copies of Shark Cannon. I've seen some people play 1, and maybe if I was doing like a blind second list, I would try to play it, but this card's just a pretty solid interruption and also can set up a lot of OTKs like Widow Anchor. And with DPE running around, this card is just a 1-card answer to it, very easily banishing it or even stealing it if you really needed to. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it today, but it's just a very versatile card for this deck as well. Now, since your deck can really get access to any of the spells at any time as long as your engine's online, you get to play a bunch of 1-ofs that you can toolbox out whenever you need them. For the first 3 1-ofs, I'm playing 1 copy of Eagle Booster, 1 copy of Afterburners, and of course 1 copy of Area 0. Eagle Booster is really amazing because it just protects whatever Link monster you have in the extra monster zone. If you have 3 spells, it also protects it from battle, but being able to make your Links unaffected by card effects can be a very awesome play this deck has. Not only that, but when you dump it with Hayate, if you go Kagari to add back, it puts a lot of pressure on your opponent to stop it because they know the very next play you do really can't be stopped because, well, Eagle Booster is going to push it through. Not only is it just really amazing for your Sky Striker engine, but of course you can use it on Anaconda, making sure it resolves to get to your DPE. Eagle Booster is probably one of my favorite cards, even though I've been tempted to cut it before. Afterburners just being your spot removal for the deck, and a non-targeting back row removal with 3 spells. It's always really, really good. Of course, you can recycle it whenever you need it, and just really helps you clear the board. Area 0 is a very great card, and you could argue playing multiples just because how good DPE is with this card. Similar to Ray, you can activate Area 0, targeting your Ray, then chaining the effect of Ray to tribute herself to special a Link from the extra deck. Then you'll get to excavate the top 3, add a Sky Striker to your hand, and then of course nothing hits the grave because, well, Ray's gone. DPE is exactly the same, so simply just activate Area 0, target the DPE, chain the DPE, pop some cards, and then Area 0 will resolve and get you a free card. And like I mentioned earlier, DPE can pop this card to special summon Ray or even Rose from the deck if you really needed it. For the last 3 1-of Sky Striker spells, we are playing the 1 multi-roll, the 1 Hornet Drones, and of course, the best card in the deck, 1 Engage. Multi-roll being your Spellbook of Judgment to recycle all your spells every turn is really amazing, and also making it to where your opponent can't respond to your spell cards is pretty crazy. So I don't know if it's ever happened to you guys, but not being able to respond to a Fusion Destiny can be pretty annoying. Hornet Drones, of course, being the token generator of the deck. Essentially, it's another copy of Ray, and of course, there's Engage, the main search card in the deck. Being able to search any of your Sky Striker spells at any time, and then of course with 3 spells, you also get to draw a card after. It's a pot of greed, basically. Super awesome. That's it for the Sky Striker spells. I am actually playing one more spell card in the deck, and it is 2 copies of Forbidden Droplet. Now, this deck doesn't OTK, so you really don't need 3 of this card. More times than not, you're using this just to push your combo or push your play through, whereas some of the other decks use it just to break boards and try to OTK or win the game right away. Droplet makes for a very versatile card, and you have to use it sparingly because sometimes sending your spells to the grave is, well, it can be kind of counterproductive as far as resources go. But that being said, there is a lot of really cool tricks you can do with it. Being able to activate a spell like Afterburners to pop a card and then chain the droplet to send the Afterburners you just activated to the grave, negating the monster effect that might be trying to negate Afterburners, and then of course the cost was free. You sent the card you activated. Another really cool trick you can do is these Sky Striker spells check the amount of spells in your grave on resolution. So for example, if you had 2 spells in your grave and you went Activate Engage to search, if your opponent did something like went Baron to Fleur to negate, you can chain Droplet, sending the Engage as cost to negate the Baron. You'll get to search a card for Engage, and then on resolution, since Engage was sent as cost to the graveyard, you'll technically have 3 spells in the grave and get the secondary effect. I know that isn't the craziest wombo combo there is out there, but you have to admit, that's pretty crazy. Like I mentioned earlier, Bird Up is actually your worst matchup, only because all your cards target, and that deck just inherently cannot be targeted most of the time. So having a card in deck, not only to out the board, but you can try to dig for with Prosperity, makes it where, for me, personally, I think this is a staple in the deck. That's it for the spells, and for the last card in the deck, probably the most degenerate thing in the deck, 3 copies of There Can Be Only One. Right now, so many decks are just reliant on one type. Sword Soul has Worm, Bird Up has Wing Beast, Phantom Knights have Warriors, Drytrons are primarily machines. The list really goes on, and while this can kind of slow your deck down, even if you can't really link climb, it's so easy to just keep control of the game with this card. All your Sky Striker links are machines, so you can't just link from one to the other, but Ray's a warrior, so you could always normal her and still do link plays that way, and Anaconda's a plant, so there's always that play, making way for DPE, and of course, Phoenix Enforcer is constantly leaving the field, so you really don't have to worry about being locked out of warriors. I will say this, if you don't have access to DPE, this card is a little lackluster, but I will say it does put most decks at a screeching halt, giving you enough time to establish whatever you need to establish, and turning this card off if you really need to is fairly easy with multi-roll or Area Zero or, like I mentioned, DPE. While this card can be pretty degenerate, I definitely think it is a staple 3 of, especially in a going first variant of Striker right now. Now, before we hop to the extra deck, I just wanted to thank you guys if you guys are still watching the video. We just recently broke the 1,000 subscriber mark, and I'm so thankful for every one of you guys for supporting the channel and really growing this community way faster than I ever expected it to. This channel keeps growing more and more every day, not only allowing me to have so much fun making these videos, but to give you guys content that you guys can hopefully look forward to seeing. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, that's okay, but please consider it. Obviously, I would love to have you guys join the squad. And not only that, but I'm going to have a bunch of other content coming out very soon. I've been a little busy with the holidays, but now that that's all over with, I'm definitely ready to start pumping out a bunch of content for all you guys. So moving on to the extra deck, it's fairly standard for the most part. We are of course on 3 copies of Sky Striker Ace Kagari. I believe the OCG has like 2 or 3 multi-roll and I think 2 engage. And that sounds really amazing, but they only have 1 Kagari, so as amazing as their spell lineup sounds, I still think I'd personally rather just have 3 Kagari. In case you guys don't know what Kagari does, is on special summon it can add a Sky Striker spell from your grave back to hand. So anytime you use one of your spells, you simply link into this and then you can use it again, or even save it for later. Whether it's adding Engage to search a second time, or getting a Widow Anchor to set as a disruption, Kagari sets up so many plays, so many resource advantages, and just awesome ways to help break boards. Not only that, but it gains 100 attack for every spell in your grave, and a lot of people forget about that, so Kagari can get pretty beefy. After Kagari, of course, we're playing 3 copies of the blue girl Shizuku. This card essentially is the link form of Dark Soul, or Skarm essentially. During the end phase of the turn it's summoned, you can add any Sky Striker card from your deck to your hand. So typically, this is what you're wanting to have on your end board. That way you can search whatever you need, whether it's Engage, or maybe just a follow-up play, or a board breaker like Widow Anchor. Shizuku is just another amazing card for this deck. Oh, one cool trick you can do also is if you have Ray, a lot of people like to make the mistake where first turn they'll summon Ray and then link into Shizuku. They'll pass their turn hoping to search Engage, and then they get hit with something like Effect Veiler. A cool trick you can do to avoid that is you can normal summon the Ray and then just enter the end phase right away. That way, during the end phase, you can use Ray's effect to special summon the Shizuku from the extra deck, preventing your opponent from activating Veiler because, well, Veiler can only be used in the main phase. And while it doesn't play around Impermanent Ash, you still play around a very important hand trap in the meta right now, so definitely keep that in mind because it's super relevant. After that, we are on 2 copies of Hayate. I really love this card and I wish I could fit 3, but with the access code package, you have to make some cuts. So while this card isn't the most important, it's definitely one of the best cards in your extra deck. In case you don't know, she can attack directly, and then if ever she attacks, you can send a Sky Striker card from your deck to the graveyard. This is really amazing because obviously right after you do that, you just link into your Kagari, add whatever you dump to your hand, essentially searching out whatever you needed in your deck. Then of course after that, you'll make Shizuku end your turn and search another card from your deck. Again, the deck doesn't know TK, but it could generate a lot of advantage pretty quickly. After the Hayate, we are on the 1 Kaina. She just can make an opponent's monster not be able to attack on summon. So more times than not, what happens is your opponent runs over one of your link monsters. Ray's effect will activate in the graveyard, special summoning herself back to the field. Then when your opponent attacks with another monster, you can quick effect, tribute it, special the Kaina, and then Kaina will activate, making it to where whatever monster you target with her can't attack for the rest of the turn. While you don't use this effect every game, whenever you do use it, it's super clutch. Oh, and not only that, but it also helps when it's getting close to time. Anytime you activate a Sky Striker spell while she's on the field, you gain 100 life points. So if it's a really close game, that's just another way you can cheese out a win in time. For the last Sky Striker Link monster, we were playing the 1 copy of Zeke. This is an amazing Link 2 for the deck, not only being able to temporarily out a monster on your opponent's side of the field for the turn, but since it's a Link 2, it makes it so easy to link Ray or whatever Link monster you might have on the field off with maybe something like your Nibiru, and then of course you'll have an ace in the extra deck, so you can just link this off and get back onto your Link 1s, easily opening up your main monster zone. Like I mentioned, Zeke will get rid of one of your opponent's monsters until the end of their turn by banishing it, so if there's a problematic monster and you just need to get it out of the way, Zeke is definitely the answer for you. Oh, it also has another effect where you can target a card you control and then Zeke will gain 1,000 attack, and then you send the card you target to the grave. So again, just another way to get things off the field, and Zeke can get pretty big. 2,500's no joke. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we are on the access code package, so we're playing the 1 Halka Fibrax, the 1 Celine, and of course the 1 access code Talker. Effect Veiler is an amazing card, but the main reason we play it is just for Celine. Simply by normal summoning a hand trap and then linking into Halka Fibrax, you can special the Veiler from your deck and then link that into Celine, and then you can use the Celine's effect to bring back the Veiler you just used to the field, and then of course that's a Link 4. Access code Talker will hit the field, and of course Celine's in the grave now, so you can target it as a Link 3, putting access code Talker up to 5,300 attack. And well, I don't know if you noticed, but all the Sky Striker links all have different attributes, so it's very easy to wipe an entire board with this card. More times than not, this is what I banish for Prosperity when I go first, and so for that reason, I don't always go into this engine, but in the games that you don't see Prosperity, it definitely can steal a game out of nowhere. Now, for the last Link in the deck, we of course play the 1 Predaplant Verte Anaconda just to pay 2,000 to make way for the Destiny Hero Destroy Phoenix Enforcer. I've been preaching it basically the whole deck profile. This card is one of the best monsters in the game right now, and of all the decks to play this card, this is the deck that abuses it the best. So that's all the time I have today, and while this deck profile isn't the most revolutionary profile out there, it definitely has some things about it that I think are very important if you wanted to play the deck. Like I've said 100 times, this deck is insanely toolbox, and with a format as diverse as it is now, having a deck that is basically a Swiss Army knife makes it that much easier to go against basically anything you run into in the meta today, making this deck one of the best choices for Pasadena. And well, now that that's canceled, this still is one of the best choices for the Remote Duel YCS coming up next. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in. I appreciate all the support, as always. And comment down below, is this the deck that you were thinking about taking to the Remote Duel YCS? Like I said, there are just so many options in the game right now, but at the end of the day, Ray is Bay. Here's hoping to see you guys next episode. Peace.